Alrighty, so our last topic is going to be change. And the reason why we left it for last is because we all know we all push off change until the last moment. So that's why we left it for last. But change is obviously one of the most important components of human behavior and human happiness. The ability to bring change into our lives in a healthy manner. And we all know, anyone here, well, first of all, before we get started, if there's any perfect people in this room, if you just raise your hand. Okay, we got a couple. Amazing.
I just figured, what the heck.
This doesn't apply to you. Enjoy the lunch. But for all the rest of us, myself included, who we are super unperfect, and we all know that there is enormous value in change being brought into our lives, but we all struggle with bringing change into our lives. Anyone who knows, who's tried to master any negative aspect of their personality, knows what a complex and long-lasting experience that can be. Surveys find that by February, most New Year's resolutions are gone. Okay, so it's entirety of about a month, if even. And on top of that, we also know from our own experiences that comes Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur time, where we're often thinking about what we want to fix, and we're like, wow, this sounds strangely similar to what I wanted to fix last year and the year before, and 2005 and 1995 and 1985, right? So it's like we're really kind of almost butting up against the same issues again and again, year after year. So we want to talk today about change. Specifically in the area, for example, of addictions. Modern research has shown that it often takes, like a smoker will often spiral at least 3 or 4 times into relapse before being able to finally kick the habit. And it's a stage of filtering where we're constantly trying to filter through our behaviors and cleaning out each time a little bit more, but it is a very complex process and takes a long time. So today we're going to try to discuss change from the dual prism of Jewish thought as well as modern psychological research. Now, when we talk about change, there are a few different models for the multi-stage process of change. The most famous one is Maimonides, who really breaks it down into 3 very basic behaviors, 3 very basic components. The first one is called azivas hachet, which means simply not doing the behavior anymore, right? So if you're an alcoholic, that would be not drinking alcohol, right? Which is not an easy thing. And many people would say, well, you really need to root out the underlying causes of this behavior before you stop the behavior. Whereas Maimonides seems to be going with the idea that really behavior drives internal cognition more than internal cognition sometimes drives behavior. Meaning, internal cognition, sort of narratives that we've created for ourselves over decades often, definitely are very strong drivers of behavior. But when it comes time to reversing that, so there's 2 models. You can say first you got to work through the internal cognition, get that changed, right? And then change the behavior. Or you say, let's change the behavior, which will then affect the internal cognition, right? CBT therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, tries to do both simultaneously. Maimonides, in his modality of change, of bringing change into one's life, says the first step is really to step away from the negative behavior, and that the behavior will drive more internal cognition than vice versa. Obviously, they're both important components, which then, of course, brings us to the second step, according to Maimonides, of bringing change into your life. So I've stopped the behavior. Is that enough? No, says Maimonides. I need to stop the cognition, which means he describes it as what we call charata, right? Which is regret. Regret means changing my cognition of this behavior. What supported this behavior until now? What has been my line of thinking? So for example, let's say I want to change the way I eat. So the Maimonides says the first step is change the way you eat. The second step is, while you're now doing that, say, what was this cognition that allowed me for so long to disregard such an important component of my health? Was it, A, for example, I said, you know what, I'm never going to be trim and fit, so why don't at least I enjoy food, right? If I'm not going to have the physique, let me enjoy the food, right? That could be a cognition that we have. And then we got to figure out what was wrong with that cognition. How do I change that cognition? Or maybe my thought process was, this is all that I have. The one thing I really enjoy in this world is food. So I'm just going to allow myself that. What was wrong with that cognition? When I say regret, how do I change that cognition? How do I recognize the error in that cognition and switch it around? And then, of course, there is an internal resolve to never do that again, which is called Kabbalah al-Ha'asid. I'm never going to treat my body as something that plays second fiddle to my need for comfort, because my body is more important than my need for comfort, right? Or something like that. And therefore, going forward, this is what I'm going to place at the top of my priority. Instead of saying, I'm a person who enjoys food, I become a person who enjoys being healthy, right? And then I, for the future, commit, that's the new me. And then, of course, and very interestingly, is a concept spoken about in the Torah and codified by Maimonides, is what we call vidoy. Vidoy is when we verbalize a confession. Research has indicated that when we verbalize something, it's far more powerful than we think something, which is all over Judaism. If you think about it, we are a nation of verbalizers, right? So you can often, when people go to therapy, for example, they'll often have an experience where, let's say they had a bad experience with their parent, but now their parent's not around anymore. There's no parent to confront or to have the conversation with. So often a therapist will have a client speak to their non-present father, right? I actually sat on the plane recently next to a woman, and I was leaving Detroit. And so I wasn't sure where she was from, and she mentioned she was from Southfield, and she had a look that she could have been Jewish, I wasn't sure. So I didn't want to just straight out, so are you Jewish, But I worked into the conversation. It turns out she was a Jewish woman. She had been married to a Catholic man for a long time. She has a son, unfortunately, who's being raised Catholic. He's already an older individual. And we got into a little conversation, and I asked her what she does, and she told me she's a shaman. When I hear shaman, I'm thinking do you have a collection of bones in your house and various herbs that you collect and burn together, and do you mutter incantations? But anyway, she was telling me about this different kinds of work that she does. Soul retrieval, which is when you try to reach back into a more innocent, happier time in your life and bring that soul from the earlier time in your life to the forefront. There's soul expulsions, where there's a negative soul sitting on your soul, and and it needs to be expelled. That's much more intense work, she tells me. I was asking her how much a shamanic experience costs. I'm saying I know with Obamacare, it's my rates in insurance have cost right now. My rates are literally, almost double what they were before. It's absurd what I'm paying in health insurance for my family. So I'm thinking maybe a shaman is a much more inexpensive alternative, and it is, by the way. A normal shamanic experience is $35, but if you have to get a soul expulsion where there's a negative soul latching onto your soul, that's it's draining work, she told me. It's about an hour to an hour and a half, but she comes out of it just totally drained, and she doesn't really give much discounts. That's $120, which, if it works, is pretty impressive. But anyway, so how did I even come into shamanic experiences? I'm not sure. I think the answer is, though, that we have to just sort of do our own experiences of soul retrieval and soul expulsion if we've brought into our life a negative behavior. And the power of verbalization, of verbalizing what you've done wrong, there's enormous power. I'll give you an example. If you ever are feeling just a little bit depressed, right? You're driving in your car, you're by yourself. Just repeat the words, I am, thank God, very happy. Just repeat those words 10 times in a row and see what effect it has. Please come back and report it, because I can almost guarantee you, just by saying those words, thank God I'm blessed and I'm very happy. Thank God I am blessed and I'm very happy. Just saying that 10 times will make a difference in how you feel. That's how powerful verbalizations are. Oh, I know how we got to the shaman, because we're talking about people talking to their parents in therapy or are no longer there, whatever it is. Verbalizing things is very powerful. There's that sort of weaker side to ourselves who always wishes I would have said that to my dad or to that teacher that bullied me in school. And then when you get a chance in a therapeutic setting to actually verbalize that, there's enormous power there. So Maimonides' final step is verbalizing your confession, verbalizing what your negative cognition and behavior was. I was very wrong all these years thinking that I was never going to have this physique and therefore I might as well just enjoy the food. And it was wrong because, right, regardless of what physique I have, the most important thing is to keep my body healthy so that I can continue to live and have a long and fruitful life. And therefore, I will no longer put the focus on what's going to bring me this pleasure, but rather I will make my pleasure in life having the healthier body. Verbalizing it. Saying to God, I am sorry, I've sinned. I ignored you for 20 years. Or I make blessings all the time, recognizing the beneficence that you've given me in my life, but about 90% of them I'm not even thinking about at all. I'm talking to you while not really talking to you, which we've all experienced people doing in our lives. So that's the Maimonides. Now, Rabbeinu Yonah, who was actually a grandson and disciple of Maimonides, he wrote a book called Sharei Teshuvah, The Gates of Repentance. And it's a very famous work. And he actually has a much more extensive steps or list of steps for the process of change. Now, what's fascinating is, in America, one of the very successful change programs is Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know that there are certain similarities between some of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and, interestingly, the 12 steps of the Gates of Repentance. So I actually Googled them this morning, and I compared them side by side. Okay? So here is the 12 steps. I'll read the 12 steps according to Sharei Teshuvah, Rabbeinu Yonah, The Gates of Repentance, because obviously he has precedence. He was there way before Bill W., the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. But then I'll point out certain similarities. All right, here we go. You guys ready for 12? Okay. Number 1, acknowledging the sin, the mistake, the misguided behavior. Number 2, abandoning the sin, the mistake, the misguided behavior. Number 3, worrying about the consequences, the future consequences of the sin, the mistake, the misguided behavior. Number 4, acting in a way opposite to the sin, the mistake, the misguided behavior. Number 5, understanding the seriousness of the behavior, the negative behavior. Number 6, avoiding certain other behaviors as a means of building a fence around you that prevents you from reenacting the negative behavior. Number 7, verbal confession of the negative behavior. Number 8, praying to God for forgiveness. Number 9, making reparations to the offended party. Number 10, remembering your misguided behavior for the rest of your life. A long time. Hopefully at least. Number 11, refraining from committing the same negative behavior if the opportunity presents itself. And number 12, teaching others not to make the same mistakes. Now here are some of the similarities in the 12 steps. Step number 1 for the Rabbeinu Yonah was acknowledging the sin. Step number 1 in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. So it's literally acknowledging this behavior. Step number 5 is understanding the seriousness of the sin. Step number 4 in Alcoholics Anonymous is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Really making a moral inventory. What am I doing? What's been going on in my life? Number 7, verbal confession of the sin in the Shari Tshuva and Rabbeinu Yonah steps would probably coincide with step number 5 of the Alcoholics Anonymous, which is admitted to God, ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, verbalizing it. Step number 9 for the Shari Teshuvah of Rabbeinu Yonah, making reparations to the offended party. Step number 8 of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, made a list of all people we harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Now there's another one here, prayer for forgiveness, which is number 8 in Rabbeinu Yonah. And I didn't write down, but I'm almost positive there's a step also about asking, because I think one of the major drivers of Alcoholics Anonymous is recognizing that we are powerless over our addiction, but there's a greater power that we can turn it over to, and asking that power. So I think I missed one over here. And then the final one is just so fascinating. It's almost like Bill W., the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, literally read the Shari Teshuvah. Maybe one day Bill W., who was an alcoholic himself, who changed his life around and then wrote this book. Perhaps one day he was walking down the street and he happened to bump into one of those guys who asked him if he put on tefillin, and he said, will you give me some alcohol for it? And they ended up getting to a whole conversation. The guy showed him this Shari Teshuvah, and then Bill W. built the whole 12-step program out of the Shari Teshuvah, because there's 12 steps. Listen to the 12-step in the Shari Teshuvah, and then listen to the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Step 12, teaching others not to make the same mistakes. Step number 12 in Alcoholics Anonymous, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to other alcoholics and to practice these steps in all of our affairs. It's a fascinating thing, really fascinating. And of course, the 12 steps is the same basis for all the 12-step programs. So it's Alcoholics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Sexual Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous. And I know of programs that had, I know of Orthodox groups that had Overeaters Anonymous meetings where they literally plug the 12 steps into the process of change based on the Rabbeinu Yonah. Number 10 was remembering the sin for the rest of one's life. Okay, now, so this is very much really connected to the concept, both Maimonides, who keeps it shorter and sweeter, and Rabbeinu Yonah, who extends it out to 12 different steps, recognizes that true change in your life of any behavior, is a remarkably complex process. The sages tell us that changing one character trait in your life is harder than splitting the sea. Right? So the incredible miracle, God split the sea. Changing one of your character traits. If you are an angry person and learning how to bring calm into your life, that is more difficult than splitting the sea. So God doesn't take it lightly. We shouldn't take it lightly. We should recognize that it's an enormous task, and that when we achieve success, we have become infinitely more powerful. If you want to feel infinitely, not infinitely powerful, but if you want to feel incredibly powerful in your life, just decide that you're going to take one trait as a result of this series and change it. And have that as your goal, that when I am done, which will take me a couple years, I will truly be able to feel like I've accomplished something harder than splitting the sea. Now, in terms of some of the more secular perspectives on repentance, so there's a famous psychologist named James Prochaska, and he has what's called the stage theory of change. And some of them align nicely with some of the steps we've read before. Some of them are different. Definitely Prochaska's model has more of an emphasis on internal change than on behavioral change. Of course, Judaism is a religion of action. We are not. There are mitzvos that deal with our internal cognition. Guess how many? No. The 613 mitzvahs are supposed to have an effect on your internal cognition. How many mitzvos have to do with your internal cognition? A little bit more. Love of God, fear of God, right? Belief in God, right? Hopefully, actually, I think after Pesach, we're going to start a series on the 6 constant mitzvos. And most of the 6 constant mitzvos are cognitions. And even those have steps that we have to take in order to get to them. The reality is, out of 613 commandments, the vast majority of them, more than 99% of them, are actions. To do or actions not to do. So, there's the famous line, right? You get into a cab in Israel, of course, every cab driver wants to talk to you about religion or politics. The 2 things us Americans have been taught from day one that we don't talk about in polite conversation, right? Everyone, your mom always taught you, like, when you visit somebody, you don't talk about religion and politics. And you get into a cab, what's the first thing the guy wants to talk to you about? Religion and politics. And I cannot tell you how many times you'll hear this statement from a cab driver. You are wearing kippah, you are religious. Oh, very nice. I am very good Jew in my heart. That's great. The famous line is, well, I hope you don't have a heart attack, because then you wouldn't be a Jew anymore. But the reality is, I'm like, okay, that's great. You are now keeping 1% of the mitzvos. You are from the 1%, my friend. Right? Time to join the other 99% of the mitzvot, which are not mitzvahs of the heart. So we are more people of action than cognition. But in any case, so we are going to talk about, though, Prochaska's stage theory of change. So, and it's also important to learn this because it helps us learn about where other people in our lives might be. The first step of change is called pre-contemplation, which means I'm not even contemplating change yet. Change may be coming up on my radar because my wife is asking me to change my behavior. My kids are asking me to change my behavior. My bank account is yelling at me, you better change your behavior. My doctor is yelling at me, you better change your behavior. But I'm not really even personally contemplating change yet. I'm in the pre-contemplation stage. Now in general, by the way, the prognosis for people who remain in the pre-contemplation stage is very, very grim. Because the pre-contemplation stage change does not have a very high success rate. You will sometimes see people in the pre-contemplation change stage attempt new behaviors, usually because they have a battle axe being held over their heads by their wife, kid, bank account, doctor, boss. But pre-contemplation change people, their experiences are going to be not just peppered, but colored with regression. And as soon as the battle axe is removed, an immediate return to the problematic behavior. Because they're not really contemplating change. They were forced at certain times. It's like, you hold my hand behind me and you twist my arm and say, put down that cookie. I'll put down the cookie. Guess what? When you walk out of the room, I pick the cookie back up. One of the clear signs of somebody who's in the pre-contemplation stage is denial, resistance when efforts are made to get the person to change. You'll often see the displacement. People in the pre-contemplation stage are experts at displacement of blame upon others and responding with anger when suggestions for change are being made. Stop nagging me. You don't understand me. You're persecuting me. Right? Okay. Next. The next stage is contemplation. Contemplation is, of course, when I start thinking about change. I'm not really there yet, but here's the kind of things you'll hear me saying. I really should go on a diet. I really should start working out. I really should start spending more responsibly. Now, what contemplation really is, it shows an internal struggle. On one hand, I recognize the value of the desired behavior I want to move towards. On the other hand, I see the immediate enjoyments and pleasures of the behavior I'm in. This is the stage of contemplation. They tell a story. There was a man who was traveling. He went to a foreign city, and he didn't know his way around. And I was just talking about this with my wife yesterday. It's the world we live in. It's so amazing. Just smartphones are only 10 years old, right? The iPhone, I think next year will be the iPhone. It will be its 10th year, and that was the real first smartphone. I mean, there's BlackBerry, and there was what was before it? There was the Palm Trio. Does anybody remember the Palm Trio? I had a Palm Trio. I was like so, But we live in a world that it's the whole idea of a smartphone. Do you remember what it used to take to get directions? Then there was a period of printing out MapQuest directions before we left, and always making sure to check it off, only black and white, right? Remember that? You would check off in the printer settings, only black and white. Why waste the color? You don't need the color, right? And we'd print out a MapQuest and directions wherever we would go. But then before that was that period where we someone would invite you over to his house. He'd say, listen, I'm on 2714 Hickory Lane. You're sitting there, you're like, yeah, you're writing it down. Remember that? You're writing it down. You got that phone cradled in your ear. 2714. It wasn't just text it to me. No, there wasn't that. It was like, yeah, okay, 2714. And he would give you exact directions. And then you would get to where you were supposed to go. And there was no Hickory Lane. And it was the middle of a residential neighborhood. And there was no pay phones. So you end up knocking on someone's door. Like, excuse me, I'm looking for 7419 Hickory Lane. Like, Hickory Lane? There's no Hickory Lane here. You're like, oh my gosh, now I'm really stuck. And you're trying to find a pay phone. Can I use your phone? Oh, I'm so sorry. We don't. No. It's like, we don't allow strangers into our home. Okay, and you go back out. It was such a hassle to get anywhere. Today, boom, you pull out your phone, Waze, ding, 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 go left, go right. Do you want a Tim Hortons on the way? It's like, would you like to go to? It's amazing. They don't get me, obviously, because they keep trying to push me to every Wendy's and McDonald's on the way. I'm like, you should learn my behaviors, right? I'm not a Wendy's or McDonald's kind of guy. Anyway, the bottom line is, though, so this guy's in a foreign city. He doesn't know his ways around. So he asks somebody, how do I get to this hotel? And the man is a nice, patient guy. He gives him very detailed, description. It's kind of complicated. He's writing it down. And finally, the guy, so he finishes giving the directions. Thank you so much. Shakes his hand. And he starts walking in the opposite direction. I just told him to go up the street. He starts walking. So, hey, buddy, hold on a second. He says, no. I know I'm going in the wrong way. I'm just not ready to go there yet. That's how we are with change. We know we're going in the wrong direction, but we're not ready to go there yet. I really should start spending more responsibly. I really should start putting away more for my future. That's the stage of contemplation. I know which way is the right way to go. I'm not really ready to go there just yet. Okay. So it's this place where we're struggling between what we want and the pleasure we have in not doing what we want, and then building up through the stage of contemplation the emotional energy to finally burst through into the next stage. Preparation. Prochaska defines the preparation stage as people on the threshold of immediate change. Okay? So it means, I'll give you an example. I used to smoke cigarettes many years ago, many moons ago. And when I decided I was going to quit, I gave myself it was like an 8-month window. I'm like, I'm going to go home to Israel for Sukkot vacation. And my last cigarette is going to be before I get on the plane, because it was right after they made the rule that you couldn't smoke in the planes. You guys remember those days when you could smoke in the planes? You'd go to the bathroom in the back and you'd come out smelling like an ashtray, even if you never smoked. It was always that red-haired Israeli lady sitting there just chain smoking, sitting in the back the whole flight. It was going through 2 packs of her duty-free. She had a suitcase of duty-free. And so, it was right after they made the law, no more smoking on international flights. And I decided, I'm going home for Sukkot, and of course on vacation you want to be able to smoke afterwards. And it was I was literally building myself up to this. And I did. And then 2 days before I quit smoking, I was chain smoking, nonstop, just to make myself just physically sick. which I did a good job of, then that was really the last cigarette I had, pretty much. So it worked for cigarettes. I can't say I didn't pick up any other bad behaviors, but that's sort of the preparation stage when I start sort of preparing. I start researching the new healthy food plans that I want to go on, and I start ordering the little scale, or I'm literally doing the actions of preparation for change. Then, of course, there's action. The consistent action starts coming into place, and then we start showing a true commitment to our change. And then, of course, there's maintenance, which is the easy one. No, I'm kidding. Right? But the more we have properly prepared ourselves and changed our cognition, the more that maintenance becomes more possible. Now, there's another model spoken about in terms of psychology, and there's a Professor Bateson who calls what's called first-order change and second-order change. First-order change is much more superficial. It's when I change what I'm doing. Second-order change is much more deep when it changes what I am. So first order change means I'm just not going to eat this. Second order change is I am now going to be a healthy person. First order change is I'm not going to spend so much money on clothes. Second order change is I'm going to start proactively putting away for my future. Or I'm a person who is careful with my money. There's very difference, right? Very big difference between first order change and second order change. First order change doesn't really require a lot of learning, emotional commitment, and just saying, I just want to stop this one behavior. But it's generally not going to be a full change of who we are. Maimonides, when talking about changing ourselves, talks about the idea that when we are going to go through what's called Teshuvah Gemura, a full change of self, we are a different person. Real change means not that I change what I do, but that I change who I am. That's what Bateson would call second order change. That's an important component when we think about how we want to change in our lives, that really the language that should be driving our internal conversation is not what behavior do I want to stop doing, but rather what person do I want to be. Okay, now, there are certain components of the change conversation that are more found in a religious discussion of change, which is often called teshuvah, that are not necessarily found in a secular change project. So, people often think of the word Baal teshuvah, a person who's acquired change, as meaning a person who has returned. The word teshuvah can mean return. And there is definitely merit to that. And what we would say you're returning to is you're returning to your inner self, your more godly self, the pure self, or as the shaman lady that I sat next to on the plane would describe, what was it, the soul, the repatriation of that earlier soul, whatever that was. So that would be one. But another idea behind the word teshuvah is the word teshuvah means something else in Hebrew. What does the word teshuvah mean besides repentance? Answer. Very good. The idea of teshuvah is that I'm seeking an answer to a problem in my life. And the process of repentance and change is a process of answering a deep call, a deep need, a deep existential question that my soul had been bombarding me with for a long time. I cannot tell you how many people I meet who describe to me this incredible sense of angst or questioning, what am I doing here? I don't have, there's no meat and potatoes in my emotional diet or spiritual diet. I'm looking for something. That is generally not as talked about in the secular discussion of change. It's more just talked about, you want this behavior and then this is why, or whatever it is. Although there is today, especially after Viktor Frankl brought the whole man in search of meaning, there is definitely a lot of conversation today about this overall angst that we feel, this overall sense of searching for meaning. Furthermore, another spiritual component of change that is definitely not part of the secular conversation is that when we mess up, we are distancing ourselves from our Creator. The biggest problem of sin is not the behavior, but rather that we are cutting ourselves off from the source of our life and our creation. That's why the language of teshuvah, repentance in Jewish law, is Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'Nashuva. Bring us back to you, Hashem, and we will return. Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem. Renew our days as days of old. This idea that we seek to be in communion with God, that we recognize that when a person lives a life in connection with a higher being, our lives are elevated and more rich lives, more meaningful lives, lives that are fulfilled and content. And that when we act in negative ways, we're tearing ourselves further and further away from that. Okay. Loneliness is a painful experience that almost every human being struggles with on some existential level. There's a famous piece written by Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, Rabbi J.B. Soloveitchik, called The Lonely Man of Faith, and it talks about how on some level deep down we all struggle with a sense of loneliness, a sense of feeling like I'm all alone in this struggle in the world. And the idea of being able to connect with God gives us enormous answer to that sense of existential loneliness. It refers to nothing with geographical loneliness. You can be surrounded with people all the time and feel incredibly alone. So that's a spiritual component of change that is often missing from the secular literature. Okay, now, what are some of the helpful components that we can use if we want to engender change in another? The simple answer is nothing. You can't change it. No, but there are some ideas here. Idea number one is congruence of expectations, which means making sure that you are on the same page as the person who you're looking to change, so to speak, or you're looking to embark on a project of change together with. If that other person's not interested in changing their behavior, and you're trying to change their behavior, you're like a Boy Scout who wants to help the little old lady across the street, but she's not going across the street. He's like, come here, I'll take you. I got to earn my badge and my merits. She's like, I'm sorry, I live right here. He's schlepping her across the street. He's like, stop me. She's like, it's like... If we're not on the same page in terms of direction, if one person is saying, I live right here, this is where I want to be, and the other person is saying, here, let me help you across the street, nothing's going to happen. Next, the only way we can help encourage change in another, whether it be a child or a spouse or a friend or whatever it is if we come across as genuine, empathetic, and warm. If we come across at all as judgmental or insincere or desiring this change for our own benefit, it's simply not going to work. It's not going to happen. Now, of course, the next one we've all heard of before, focusing on the behavior, not on the person. Last night, my 3-year-old son bit my 5-year-old daughter. That was bad. And we're like, we're not a biter family, We have some cousins. No, I'm kidding. We're not a biter family per se, and no, not the cousins who live in Detroit. my wife's sister is here, so I just want her to know I'm not talking about her kids. We're not a biter family, and I needed him to know that very early, and I felt that even though he's only 3 years old, he really needs to know this immediately, so he was right away put in his room. And then we had a conversation, and in this conversation I told him many times, because I knew he was very young, and it was probably one of the sternest rebukes I've ever given him. I mean, he's only 3 years old. But I told him multiple times, you're a very good person, Binyamin, but you did a bad thing. Biting is a bad thing. And I felt like I really had to hammer that home because I was afraid that as young as he is, he wouldn't be able to differentiate. If I just told him, you did a bad thing, It's very hard. Look, as adults, when someone tells us we did something wrong, how often do we take that as personal criticism? Someone says, oh, by the way, you loaded the paper and the printer wrong. What are you saying? I'm incompetent? No. I'm just saying you loaded the printer and the paper, the paper and the printer wrong. But so if we're like that, for sure, my 3-year-old son. So I made sure to tell him again and again and again and again, you are a good person, Binyamin, but you did a very bad thing. Okay. Now next, change actually most frequently happens not by direct confrontation of the item, but rather by indirect. There's a saying they say, people don't change when they see the light. They change when they feel the heat. Right? I'll give you an example. It's an amazing story. The OU is the Orthodox Union. It's a very large organization here in America, and it's got thousands of congregations that are under its umbrella. And they had at one point, a couple years ago, maybe 5 years ago or so, they decided they wanted to make a campaign to abolish the Kiddush Club. Okay, for those of you who are familiar with the Kiddush Club, or for those who are not familiar with the Kiddush Club is this absurd custom. I'm not sure how it got into, well, I actually know how it got into our place. People wanted to have a good time, didn't want to listen to the speech. But the basic idea is that usually it's either right before the rabbi speaks, they'll walk out, 20% of the congregation will just up and walk out. Sometimes they stay for the rabbi's speech, then they walk out for the reading of the services. But whatever it is, some 10 to 20% of the congregation just walks out of shul, and then usually sneaks into the kitchen or whatever. It doesn't really sneak because and there they begin to lubricate themselves generously with alcoholic beverages and various foodstuffs. Some Kiddush clubs are more advanced. They actually have hot cholent. Some Kiddush clubs are more advanced. They have hot cholent and all kinds of herrings. I mean, there are some pretty, elaborate Kiddush clubs. And then they come back to shul, whether they're coming back for the rabbi's speech or they're coming back for the Musaf service, and you could smell the breath. It's incredibly inappropriate. So the OU made a move maybe 5 years ago to abolish the Kiddush Club. Even though it was never an officially sanctioned institution, it had become so commonplace that there was a need to really abolish it. So this rabbi, he comes home from, he's the rabbi of a large synagogue, and it was a member of the OU, and he comes back from the conference, and he announces the next Shabbos in shul. He says, we are going to take a firm stand in this shul. We are abolishing the Kiddush Club, blah, 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 blah. The president of the shul comes over to the rabbi after shul that day, furious. What's wrong with you? How dare you try to abolish our Kiddush Club? It's just some innocent fun. What are you trying to take even a little bit of pleasure we get out of going to shul out of our, whatever. That's just listen to yourself, right? Put a mirror into your words and just focus it back into your ear and see what happens, right? You're taking all the fun out of going to shul, right? It's we can't go and get half drunk in the middle of davening. Wow, okay. But anyways, he really gave it to the rabbi. And this shul, they did not abolish the Kiddush Club. They just, in direct contradiction to the rabbi's words. This is one of the struggles we have today. I saw a sign, someone, they said, there's a famous line they say about rabbis. If a rabbi in shul, if nobody likes the rabbi, then he's not a mensch. If everybody likes the rabbi, he's not a rabbi. This is the reality. Any rabbi is gonna. If everyone loves you, you're probably not putting your foot down on anything, which means you're not really being a rabbi. So but he tried, and they just overruled him. Anyway, a few months later, the rabbi gets a phone call from the president of the shul, and he says, "You know what? I'm sorry, Rabbi. We should have listened to you. We decided we're abolishing the Kiddush Club." He says, "That's amazing. I'm really glad to hear that. Can I ask what prompted this conversation?" And the man says, "Sure." He says, a couple nights ago, I went to watch a basketball game with my son at Madison Square Garden in New York. My son's 15 years old, and right in the row in front of us, a bunch of people were just drinking tons of beers, and they just started acting stupid. So I thought, here's a real teachable moment. So I turned to my 15-year-old son, and I say, "Son, you see those guys right in front of us? You see how silly they're acting? That's what happens when you drink alcohol." And my son turns to me and says, Dad, that's exactly how you and your buddies look every week when you come back from the Kiddush Club.
Whoa. Right in the face.
Right in the face. Boom. And that's when they decided to abolish the Kiddush Club. The idea is the frontal attempt of the rabbi to say, you need to stop this Kiddush Club, did nothing. But when he felt the heat of his own hypocrisy by being sort of placed side by side with it by his son, that's what really changed. It wasn't that he saw the light, it's that he felt the heat. Right? Here's another fascinating observation. David Pelkovitz, one of the authors of this book, Life in the Balance, said he worked for years in a shelter for battered women. And there, obviously, the psychology of women who have been long-term victims of extreme domestic violence is very, very complex. And there's a lot of different practical and psychological considerations. But what he would see most often is that what finally would get a woman to just say, I'm done, I'm leaving, is not their friends saying, you need to get out of this relationship, not the rabbi, not her psychologist. It was when the kid says, why do you let him do this to you, mommy? Boom. Innocent kid. Not trying to make her do anything, not trying to get her out of the relationship, nothing. Just innocently saying, why do you let him do this to you, mommy? Boom. They pick up and walk out. So that is often how change is engendered, not by trying to force someone to see your light, by flashing the light in front of them with great clarity so they should see all the errors of their doing, but rather by sort of letting that happen, letting the hypocrisy of their own actions evolve through that experience. There's four important components to this idea. Number one is the idea that the frontal efforts that we just described will often fail. It is often through the indirect contact that they see that allows them to make the change. In both those incidents, whether we describe the kid who says to his mommy, why do you let him do that to you? Or when we describe the kid saying to his dad, that's the way you guys look when you come back from shul. Neither of them were actually trying to change the behavior at stake, right? The kid was not trying to get his father to abolish the Kiddush Club. And the kid saying to his mommy, why do you let him do it to you, is not trying to get the mom to leave the husband. It's a kid simply trying to understand. It's often actually, it's something, and neither of them were expressed in an accusatory manner. Right? They were just stated, observations. And it was just a genuine question, or a genuine statement coming from a child. The more genuine the statement is, now of course, children generally have that genuineness because they are young and innocent. However, we don't have a automatic genuinity cloud around us. So if we want to really engender change in people, they have to believe that we're genuinely thinking about them and not thinking about us and what we want. And lastly, in Sichos Musar, which is a great book written by Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, one of the famous mashkiachs, the spiritual guides of the previous generation, he talks about the idea that sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they're really going to be ready to change. And he brings a pasuk. It says, Ki nafalti kamti. I'll read it to you in English. Rejoice not against me. For when I fall, I will rise. When I sit in darkness, God will be a light to me. And the Medrash says on this, if I hadn't fallen, I would have never gotten up. If I didn't sit in the darkness, I would never appreciate the light. Sometimes we see a child slipping in their behavior. And we want so badly to clamp it down. But depending on, again, there's a lot of complexity here. Because if it's a sort of small negative trait, we can sometimes just nip it in the bud. But sometimes a person who's really enjoying something bad that they're doing or whatever it is for the first time, they're just getting involved. You can sit here and give you can sit here and give somebody all these explanations why this is not good for them in the long run. But if they haven't really hit a bottom yet, or some sort of bounce off of a bottom, they may not be ready to hear you at all. So you might want to just save your breath, because just be starting that conversation now is, If a person just did something for the first time or is getting involved in something, and at this point they're in that sort of the infatuation stage where they don't really understand what they're doing, they think that this is amazing or whatever it is, often starting to become a major nag right then could just be a very hurtful thing to the process. So, in conclusion, this has been a very a nice series. I really enjoyed talking about all the many components. The overall arching theme here was that happiness is a cognition. It's not what happens to you, but simcha is sham moach. It's how we think about things. We talked about persistence. We talked about shame. We talked about patience. We talked about change. We talked about alacrity. We talked about a whole lot. I highly recommend you get the book, Life in the Balance, and read it over many, many, many times. It's been an enormous pleasure to talk with you guys about this, and may we all have a life filled with J-pop, Jewish positive psychology, joy, fulfillment, and goodness. Thank you very much.